Ready. 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 What? What do you want, Spider-Man? Can't you see I'm reading over here? Don't you have a video to do? Like a marathon? I don't know what marathon I have to do. Oh, come on, you know, a series of Marvel movies? What are you talking about? What Marvel movies do I have to review? Oh, come on, you're actually reading my comic book, so you have some idea of what it is. I can't escape it, can I? Yep, your viewers would like to hear your reviews of the Spider-Man-A-Thon, man. So, come on, man. Shall we begin this Spider-Man-A-Thon or what? Well, fear not, Spidey. The Spider-Man-A-Thon shall begin. What's up, everybody? Monster Master Godzilla here, and I'm here to begin a new video for you guys in honor of Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse coming out. We're going to be beginning the Spider-Man-A-Thon. Now, before I begin the video, this is the review. I'm gonna say this is gonna start from the early days up until Morbius, which I will. Yes, that's right. I will include all the Spider-Man movies from Sony to Marvel Cinematic Universe to the spin-offs and up until. And I'll be reviewing the Across the Spider-Verse at the end of this Spider-Man-A-Thon. So now I'm beginning the reviews, starting with Spider-Man from Sam Raimi. Now this one is the first, which I like to dub this one as Spider-Man the Movie. Now this movie, oh my god, this had so many sentimental values to me. I was 7 years old when the very first Spider-Man movie came into theaters, and I was blown away, caused major impact on me as a child, and it's one of my favorite movies growing up, and it's still awesome to this very day. And Tobey Maguire was my Christopher Reeve to Superman, the first actor to play Spider-Man in a movie. Which, it's freaking amazing. Like, you have no idea how much of an impact it caused on me when I was 7 years old. So anyway, this one came out in 2002. I was 7 years old. I remember when I was 7, my mom took me to seeing it in the theaters when I was 7. And my god, oh, it's something I can never forget. Such nostalgia. And as you know, because I know it's simply titled Spider-Man, and because it's the very first Spider-Man movie, I like to dub it as Spider-Man the Movie. So, storyline, quite amazing. It has a good storyline. The movie is like somewhat close to the comic book. And all the actors, I pretty much liked the choices of actors they picked. Like Tobey Maguire in the role of Peter Parker / Spider-Man, James Franco, Harry Osborn, who is Peter Parker's best friend, Kirsten Dunst, who played Mary Jane Watson, J.K. Simmons, the voice who played Jonah Jameson, and Willem Dafoe, who played the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, aka the Green Goblin. And it's directed by Sam Raimi, who also directed a lot of my favorite movies, including Evil Dead, which, if you haven't seen the Evil Dead-A-Thon, go check it all out. Go check out my Evil Dead-A-Thon. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. And now, it's pretty much who also directed Drag Me to Hell and Oz the Great and Powerful. So now, back to Spider-Man. The comic, it shows that Sam Raimi had directed the comic book, had respected part of the comic book. And like Peter Parker ran late for the school, ran late for the bus. And and when he got on the bus, you could see he was bullied, which pretty much accurate to the comic. Another thing accurate to the comic is that he wore glasses, which is pretty much like what he always wore in the comic book. And then, when they were at the Institute, they had radioactive spiders, genetically designed super spiders. Peter Parker, and one of the spiders got missing. It was a red and blue spider. And then the spider came down, and it bit Peter Parker in the hand. What really happened in the comic, it's very much like the comic book. The only difference is the spider came down, got hit with radiation, and then bit Peter Parker. Whereas in the movie, the spider's already radioactive. And meanwhile at Oscorp, they were having some things about the flight suit and glider, which foreshadows to a later scenes. And now, when you meet Harry and Norman Osborn, their relationship is pretty much like the comic book, very much like the comic book. The relationship is always strained, and and Norman spends more time at work than with his own son. So that's pretty much like the comic book. And then, when Peter came home after being bitten by a radioactive spider, he meets up with Aunt May and Uncle Ben. And of course, Uncle Ben was still alive, and he says that he doesn't feel well, and he ends up falling asleep. And then after that, he wakes up having some muscles on, some rockin' muscles that he had on, and somehow he didn't need his glasses. He takes it off and he puts it on, and the glasses is blurry, but when he takes it off, he doesn't need the glasses anymore. And he looks at Mary Jane. And finally, he came home, when he came home, he ends up feeling amazingly weird. So then Harry, when he was on his way to school, he finds. Oh yeah, but before that, while Peter was dealing with some problems with after getting bit, when his body's mutating, Norman Osborn was at Oscorp, and he enhanced himself with some kind of toxin. It caused him to become incredibly strong, and it changed his psychology forever. He ended up forming some kind of split personality. So that's when Harry finds Norman on the floor, lying down on the floor. And he's been up all night, and then Norman says, "Last night I was," and then he says, "I don't remember now." And then he said something about the flight suit and glider being stolen, which you later find out later on. And you find out why it's been stolen. So then, while Peter's in high school, he ends up getting into a fight with Eugene Flash Thompson, played by Joe Manganiello, which, in case you're wondering, yep, that's who, Joe Manganiello. You may have known him in stuff like True Blood and Magic Mike. So, yep, this is the first movie I saw him in. He was younger then. And then, when Peter, after he grabbed the paper on the bus, he ends up ripping it by accident, which found out he has incredible strength, powers to stick to things. And then, while he's at lunch, in the lunchroom, while he's in the cafeteria, he ends up forming spider sense and saves Mary Jane and retracts her and makes sure her lunch doesn't fall. So then that's when found out that and that scene took multiple tries in reality. There was no CGI or anything. It was actual practical effects. The whole movie had a lot of practical effects, especially under Sam Raimi's chair. And then Peter ends up realizing the fork was sticking to him, and he realized he has spider powers, shooting webs out of his hands, which in the comic book, Peter Parker did not form abilities to shoot webs out of his hands after getting bitten by a spider. Only wall crawling, spider sense, and spider strength. He built web shooters, which caused him to shoot webs. While this interpretation of Spider-Man, he had organic webbing come shooting out of his hands, which that's accurate and inaccurate to the comic book. By accurate to the comic book, I mean like they actually showed that in a comic book called Spider-Man Unlimited, where he ends up forming organic webbing after he became the Man Spider, which that didn't last long. So a lot of people like to see Spider-Man better as like shooting webs through his web shooters, which I personally like that idea better because it gives it more of a challenge, more vulnerable. So, and then when Peter tries shooting the web and tries getting rid of the web, he ends up flinging the web on Eugene Flash Thompson, and the food ends up landing on him, and oh boy, he was having a fit of rage. And that's when he accuses Peter of starting a fight. So then Flash ends up starting a fight, ends up trying to beat up Peter Parker. But Peter ends up developed the spider strength and reflexes, thanks to the spider sense. So he dodges all the moves, and then when he blocked the move, he grabbed Flash's arm and then punches him, and he sends him flying and got knocked out. And Harry, he thought it was amazing. He's like, "Peter, that was amazing," he says. And then, guilty of it, Peter ends up running away from school. So then he discovers more about himself, and he realizes the spider bite mark on his arm, and he ends up feeling some weird, and he sees the spider, and then he later forms the ability to crawl on the wall, which that's also from the very first comic book, Amazing Fantasy number 15. So he crawls on the wall, and he thought it was so interesting. Which there are some moments where it's really funny too, where he's like jumping from building to building, and he has like this moment going, "Go web, fly, up and away web, Shazam, go web, go." And he's trying to get used to shooting web. And when he was getting used to shooting web, he says, "Tally ho," and then swings across. And then just when he thought he has it down, he ends up hitting it. He ends up bashing onto a building and slids, which that was really funny. And Peter ends up going home and finds out that he flaked out on his Uncle Ben. And then he sees Mary Jane arguing with her dad. And Mary Jane, if you read the comic book, Mary Jane actually has a bad relationship with her father and an abusive parent. So yeah, the hottest redhead. So yes, Mary Jane, who you know is Spider-Man's girl, was like Peter Parker's main squeeze. The hottest redheaded girl ends up having a shitty parent. Which, that's a big shame. But it doesn't stop her from being such an awesome, good girl. And she was able to escape her abusive father, though. And then, later, Peter ends up training more of his powers. And then he ends up having one argument with Uncle Ben. And then Uncle Ben taught him this one iconic line, which the comic book always says about Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. So after Peter ends up arguing with Uncle Ben one last time, he ends up going to he acts like he's going to the library, but instead he ended up signing up for a wrestling ring, and also when he ends up going to the wrestling ring, he wanted to call himself the Human Spider, and also the wrestler was played by Randy Savage, called Bonesaw McGraw. In the comic book, that was a nod to Crusher Hogan, who was the wrestler that Peter fought when he was before he was becoming Spider-Man. So all these moments where Randy Savage being Bonesaw McGraw, where he's like, "This Bonesaw is ready." He's like saying, "Hey, Freak Show, you're going nowhere. I got you for 3 minutes. 3 minutes of playtime." All that is just Randy Savage being Randy Savage. And it's very fitting too. And also naturally, because this is Sam Raimi's film, Bruce Campbell makes a cameo, which, as you remembered, if you haven't been on my channel long, Bruce Campbell is one of my favorite actors of all time. And he was on the Evil Dead trilogy. He was Ash Williams, which Ash Williams is my man, bro. I love me some Ash Williams. So then Peter ends up meeting up. So then when Peter tries to call himself the Human Spider, Bruce Campbell's character hated that idea as the wrestling announcer. He says, "The Human Spider, is that the best you got?" "Yeah." "Oh, that sucks." So he ends up calling him Spider-Man. So then after that, Peter ends up embracing the name Spider-Man instead of Human Spider. So Peter wants to impress his girl MJ with a new car. But there was an ad for the wrestling match that says $3,000. But it turns out, after defeating Bonesaw McGraw, he ended up ripping him off with only giving him $100. So then that's when they had the famous line, "I missed the part where that's my problem." So then and then there was a robber that shows up, threatening and intimidated them into stealing the money. And then Peter, like the comic book, Peter let a criminal get away, and he felt that it wasn't his problem that the fight promoter got robbed. So then, but later found out it was Uncle Ben. He ends up finding his Uncle Ben getting shot and killed. So he ends up going after the man who killed his uncle. Just like the comic book, Peter ends up going after the man that killed his uncle. So he went after the man and beats him up, and killer's gone. So then Peter ends up feeling regrets and seeing his Aunt May. And so Peter ends up beating himself up. He realized that he let a criminal get away. Like in the comic book, Peter ended up realizing he let a criminal get away, and that same criminal he let get away ends up shooting his Uncle Ben. And I won't spoil much, but it's retcon to Spider-Man 3, but I will mention that later on. So after that, then later the Green Goblin shows up and foiling government's plans with the battlesuit, and he calls him Massacre. Meanwhile, Peter and his classmates all graduated high school. While Peter mourns over Uncle Ben, how he misses Uncle Ben, and he wished that Uncle Ben was alive to see this. So Peter ends up moving out on his own into the city, and then where you see a drawing of the Spider-Man suit, of the official Spider-Man suit, where it's just where he looks like here. The official Spider-Man suit, they don't show Peter making it, but when it cuts to him when he already had the suit, it's implied by fans that he made it. So he ends up foiling all crime, and everybody sees him. Everybody saw him, and he's all over the news. And then, when they found out the name Spider-Man, it finally cuts to J. Jonah Jameson, where he has a paper of him saying, "Who is Spider-Man? He's a criminal, that's who he is." And now J.K. Simmons, he does an amazing job playing J.K. Simmons, playing J. Jonah Jameson. He looks very much like the character. He is very spot on, and his voice is really on point too. And then all of a sudden, Peter ends up having some difficulty trying to find a job. And supposedly he had a job with Dr. Connors, who you would see in Spider-Man 2, but his name was mentioned, but not seen. But then he realized he was skilled in photography. So he ends up getting perfect shots of Spider-Man, pictures of himself as Spider-Man, and he gives it to the Daily Bugle. And so he ends up becoming a freelance photographer. And there's Elizabeth Banks, who played Betty Brant, who was also like J. Jonah Jameson's secretary. And there's also Robbie, who was real name Joe Robertson, nicknamed Robbie, which Peter also becomes friends with. So that's when Peter gets the job at the Daily Bugle, becoming a freelance photographer. And then one day, the Oscorp ends up having Norman dismissed. So then eventually Norman was so pissed how this company ends up firing him since he built it. And so later they make at the Oscorp festival, the Green Goblin shows up, and he ends up causing a massacre all over the whole thing all over the festival. And Spider-Man ends up battling the Green Goblin for the first time. So yes, the Green Goblin's the main villain of the film. And so Spidey takes on the Green Goblin throughout the film. And so then at the final battle, and then later the Green Goblin, and then the second battle, before the second battle, the Spider-Man ends up saving Mary Jane from muggers. And they have these famous kiss, which is this one right here. where it's upside down, where Spider-Man's upside down, and Mary Jane doesn't know that Peter Parker's Spider-Man. And so they finally made. So then, in the second battle in the burning building, Spider-Man, of course, was accused of being a criminal by the police, but later that they weren't. They later found out he's really a hero. So, and after that, the Green Goblin ends up throwing one of those pumpkin grenades that were razor bats and cuts Spider-Man's arm. So then, when Spider-Man escaped from the Green Goblin, they end up meeting up. Norman ends up meeting up with Peter and family for Thanksgiving, and then later, Aunt May realized that Peter's bleeding right on his arm, and Norman later recognizes the cut on Peter's arm. So he recognizes the cut on Peter's arm, which means that means that the Green Goblin found out who Spider-Man really is. So he found out who Spider-Man really is. He later ends up attacking Aunt May. And then after Aunt May, he ends up kidnapping Mary Jane. And the final battle takes place on the Brooklyn Bridge. Now, here's the thing. The final battle and also on the Brooklyn Bridge, the Green Goblin had this funny moment where he's like, "Itsy bitsy spider went up the water spout. Down came the goblin and took the spider out." Now hear me out. The final battle is very much like the comic book. It took place on the Brooklyn Bridge. The Green Goblin kidnapped Spider-Man's girlfriend after he found out who he really is. And and here we go. The one change they made is Mary Jane. In the comic book, it was really supposed to be Gwen Stacy that the Green Goblin kidnaps. But the biggest change they made is that the Green Goblin ends up killing Gwen Stacy, where Spider-Man tries to save her, and her neck snapped. But only this time, Mary Jane ends up getting kidnapped by the Green Goblin, and she survives. So Mary Jane did not get killed. Comic book wise, Peter Parker dated Gwen Stacy before dating Mary Jane. So after saving Mary Jane, the final battle ends where Spider-Man ends up getting battle damage and he ends up having a hard time fighting Green Goblin. And where the Green Goblin says something like, "Misery, misery, misery, that's how you chose. I offered you friendship and you spat on my face." And then right when Spider-Man was wounded, the Green Goblin tries to kill him, saying, "I'm going to finish you nice and slow." But then when his strength renewed, and you see that Spider-Man's about to snap. And he said, "MJ and we're going to have a hell of a time." So then Spider-Man got his strength back, and he brutalized the Green Goblin. And then the Green Goblin says, "Peter, stop." And then he reveals himself to be Norman Osborn in front of Spidey. But then he tried to manipulate Spider-Man, saying, "I've been like a father to you. Be a son to me." And Peter says, "I have father. His name was Ben Parker." Also, when he says, "I have father, his name is Ben Parker," Uncle Ben is not his dad. He's saying that Uncle Ben was like his father. His father from the comic book is Richard Parker. He died in a plane crash with his mother, Mary, which we will talk about that in the Amazing Spider-Man duology, which I'll get to later. And so then the Green Goblin tries to kill him with the glider after he said, "Godspeed, Spider-Man." And then Spider-Man dodges the glider and impales the Green Goblin, which that's very much like the comic book. And then the Green Goblin dies. So then Spider-Man ends up taking Norman's body to his home. And then Harry comes in and he accuses Spider-Man of killing Norman Osborn. So then at the funeral, Harry says to Peter, "One day Spider-Man will pay." Which he doesn't realize that Spider-Man is Harry's best friend. So then after that, Mary Jane ends up bringing out his feelings, telling her feelings to Peter, saying that she loved him, and they kiss. But Peter says, "I will always be with you. I will always be your friend, and nothing more than a friend." So Peter ends up giving up Mary Jane to protect her, so he can stick around being Spider-Man. You'll find out why he said that in Spider-Man 2. So there we go. Here's the biggest final line. It says, he says this, "Whatever lies in store for me, I will never forget these words. With great power comes great responsibility. This is my gift, my curse. Who am I? I'm Spider-Man," he says. And that was the best final line ever. And it shows Spider-Man swinging one last time for his moment of triumph after the defeat of the Green Goblin. And as it ended, the credits roll. And that's pretty much it. It's big maximum impact in my life. If you're a hardcore Spider-Man fan, you must grab this in your collection. And if you want to if you're a casual moviegoer, this will be right up your alley. If you want to get into comic book movies, this is definitely one I truly recommend. And this is definitely not hard to find when it comes to Spider-Man movies. It's not like all the others. This is definitely one of the easiest find in Spider-Man movies history. I mean, casual moviegoer or hardcore Spider-Man fan, go watch this one. It's just it's amazing, awesome impact to my life, and I think you will enjoy it as much. And that's all I have to say, folks. And as always, stay awesome, my Monster Masters, and I'll catch you on the flip side as we review Spider-Man 2. And as always, stay awesome, my Monster Masters, and I'll catch you later. Bye!